You know, a longtime viewer of my channel once said to me, I think Eisel is not as short in real life as he may seem on camera. I really didn't get it. Everybody was like, how short do you think I am? With a shot like this is exactly what I wonder. I'm just kind of like, I'm floating in a sea of nothingness. I mean, I filmed this stuff. I mean, instead, I could do it with the window in the background or something. But you know, it just seems to me like there's no context. And you know what? You know what it might be? It might be because I use a really enormous cup. These cups are huge. Maybe you think I'm tiny, and this is a regular size cup. Melissa, could you bring me a regular size cup? No rush. But yet, that must be what it is. People think I'm short because I drink out of a huge cup. There you go. Mystery solved. There you go. Yeah. So I am about 6'3" in American measurements. Yeah. So with that digression out of the way, this is a video that's actually about veganism for a change. Had a conversation over Discord last night. Isaac was there, aka Ask Yourself. A bunch of people talking to me, and you know, I realized I've done a few different videos over the years talking about what I call the boycott mentality. But almost all those videos, there was some other thesis or purpose I was driving at, and I wasn't answering the simple, central question of the economic efficacy of veganism. So I'm going to start by answering the question, why does this matter? And then I'm going to answer the question itself, and then we're going to move on to necessary implications. Because I realized in my discussion last night, this is baffling and troubling for some vegans and for some people who are considering becoming veganism. And above all, I think it is troubling for people who are committed to veganism as a diet, but have not yet committed to whether or not they want to be vegan activists or how activists they're going to be, which is a meaningful question in its own right. Okay, so why does this matter? Some people begin their engagement with veganism with the jejune assumption that a change in diet alone will save the lives of a large number of animals. So they may feel that they personally are saving the lives of a certain number of animals. They may tell their family, look, if all 5 of us become vegan, then we will save the lives of so many animals per year. They may even be so foolish that they donate money to a website that promises them, if you donate $500, you're going to save the lives of so many animals. So there's some phony math out there, and that math is appealing to, I don't know, your jejune wishful thinking, wanting to think you're directly saving the life of an animal by eating tofu and not eating turkey, right? And then at some point, almost all vegans start to question how linear the mathematical relationship is here. They look around them in society and they realize, look, if we have a country with 300 million people in it and only one person is vegan and everyone else eats meat, the diet of that one person can't possibly have an impact on how many cows are actually being slaughtered, how many pigs are being slaughtered, etc., etc. And they started to think, well, if we have a society of 300 million people and there are only 3,000 vegans in that society, how much of an impact could the dietary and economic choices of those 3,000 people have? Could they really save the lives of even one cow, of even one pig? Could they even have an impact on the prices of these goods and services? And they think, at some point, they start to doubt and they start to wonder, given the complexities of the free market, and also given the type of intervention in the free market that the government has, the various forms of subsidy, price controls, assistance to agriculture, which is different in Europe than it is in North America. It's different in the United States than it is in China. But nevertheless, all around the world, you generally have a hybrid of free market forces and government intervention forces, bailouts, subsidies and subvention and controls of various kind, which guarantee that farmers make money, that offer, for example, for the government to buy up food that nobody else wants to buy or wants to eat, so on and so forth. These things profoundly shape the way agriculture works. Given these complexities, they start to doubt, even if we have 30,000 vegans in this country of 300 million people, how can we actually imagine that the dietary choice alone, that the boycott alone, is saving the lives of animals? And to give a simple example, we all know if we have a movement of 30,000 people who refuse to drink beer, we just all decide, look, forget it. We're all going to quit alcohol. We're going to stop drinking beer entirely. Do you really think that will directly cause the beer factories of the world, in aggregate, to produce fewer bottles of beer, even if we have 30,000 people? Now, of course, there's also a question, is our impact enough that the beer company would even have a sale or would lower its prices? Because there's the flexibility of supply and demand and price going up and down. And the price of beef, the price of pork, the price of these things does go up and down. So that's flexible. And then there are also these mechanisms of government support, government bailout, government price controls also, that further skew the type of impact you can have directly and economically. Now, sometimes these types of arguments are easier to make clear if you take the equation and flip it on its head, if you present the equation in its inverse. Very obviously, if we had a society of 300 million people and almost everybody is vegan, if 99% of people are vegan, or if there's only one person who eats meat, if 99.99% of people are vegan, then obviously each meal that's eaten by the one person in our society who eats meat requires killing an animal, right? Because nobody else eats meat. We live in a hypothetical country where nobody eats meat. Obviously also, if I and my family, let's say I have a family of 5 people, if we decide to double the amount of meat we eat every week, if we decide to increase the amount of meat, we must know that this corresponds to more animals being killed. And it's very easy to see in aggregate, if everyone in our society decides to double the amount of beef they eat, I'm saying beef for a reason, not meat in general, I'm specifically beef. If everyone in our society decides to double the amount of beef they eat, it is obvious that the millions of people increasing their beef consumption must correspond to a doubling of the number of cows being killed. You can't just have a response in terms of prices or government intervention or these other complicating factors. It's true, those things are enough to make you question whether or not mere economic activism, mere boycotts, mere changes in consumption can really have those kinds of outcomes. But nevertheless, when we flip it on its head, it's very clear there must be some relationship here, and there must be some threshold. There must be some tipping point. There's some point at which so few people are buying beer that the beer factory says, hey, let's maybe reorganize and make so many bottles of beer, and maybe we can use the same machinery and start making so many bottles of soda pop or orange juice or some other product. Or maybe some of the factories have to close down because people are drinking less and less beer than they did in the past. There's going to be some kind of reorganization and reckoning with the reality of what supply and demand must be. But what that tipping point is, at what stage you have enough of an impact through consumer choice and economic behavior alone, is very difficult to say, especially in a society this enormous. So by the same token, when I was living in a small poverty-stricken town in northern Laos, I have mentioned this before, but probably 3 or 4 years ago on this channel, I lived in a town where a good income was $15 per month. $15 per month in cash was a good household income. And a wealthy family might have made $30, $45 of income. Now, their extreme poverty was moderated by the fact that they could get a lot of their food for free. So I knew people earning $15 a month, and they would go out fishing in a tiny creek, in a tiny river, and they would wander in the forest and gather food that grew wild. They were very tough, poverty-stricken third world conditions. But one of the reasons why it was possible to survive with so little cash income was that they did have sources of food they were not paying for, and they also had sources of shelter that were free. They were not paying rent of any kind, most of these people surrounding me. Anyway, and in these conditions, that town I'm thinking of, they killed on most days, the whole town together killed 1 pig per day. And I remember I was once scoffing that if you woke up early enough in the morning, you could see the rich people going to buy, pieces of the 1 pig that had died that day. Now, the reason why that's a funny memory for me was that I then had to catch myself. I had just referred to these as rich people, but they were wealthy relative to the incredibly bleak standards of poverty. So there are some circumstances. Now, in that town, of course, I haven't been back. Probably if I went back today, probably that same market in the morning, they're probably killing 10 pigs now. With the increase in local affluence, the emergence from communism, the emergence from post-war poverty, economic development, they probably have more economic disparity. They probably have more rich people and more poor people. But there probably are more pigs being killed. So in some circumstances, those market mechanisms, you can really see it, you can really measure it. But for most of us living in a highly populous, highly developed Western economy with millions of people participating, it's very, very easy to get discouraged with the boycott mentality, with merely economic, consumerist methods of vegan activism. And if you feel this way, don't deny it, don't distract yourself from it. You feel discouraged for a reason. Even though there is some abstract, there's an equation on the chalkboard that tells you you're doing something good through this boycott. You are correct to doubt that you are saving the life of even one animal when you go to the grocery store and choose to buy tofu rather than beef. You are correct to worry that vegans, being a tiny minority within the United States of America, are barely having any impact on the prices of meat. And if you want to study empirically what this looks like, this is why before I mentioned the doubling of beef specifically. Over time in the United States of America or any large Western society, when you look at the statistics for how many hogs are being killed, how many cows, and how many chickens, of course there are more statistics, we're just those three examples to keep it simple here, you will see dramatic increases and decreases, partly due to economic recessions, partly due to wars, partly due to sudden abrogations of trade deals, international trade treaties, but most often the ones you can see in the chart are due to disease. So in the newspapers, there will be a headline saying that there's a deadly virus being spread through chicken, for example. There's a disease of some kind being spread through chicken meat. And then all of a sudden, the number of chickens being consumed declines, and the number of cows being killed for meat can increase dramatically by the same token. There's a scare about pork, similar pattern. And indeed, at several points during my lifetime, there have been major, major health concerns about beef, where the number of cows being eaten suddenly declines precipitously. So one of them within my life was what was called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is also known as mad cow disease. Mad cow disease is obviously a slang term. So at different times, whether it's due to economic forces or sudden fear of death, people for completely non-ethical reasons suddenly stop eating one type of meat and start eating another. So you can see those dramatic changes in supply and demand and the number of animals being slaughtered and sold. That has happened. There is an historical record of that. And it is somewhat depressing to know that the impact vegans can have, especially in a society like the United States of America, is never going to aggregate to even be a tiny fraction of one of those case studies that you can look at in the stats. Now, furthermore, this is the new part of the story. There is right now a new political lobbying group organized by the YouTube channel Vegan Batgirl. So I just want to be clear. The name of her YouTube channel is Vegan Batgirl. I'm not making a joke. I'm not insulting her. This isn't a nickname for her. That's the name of the YouTube channel. So if you look up Vegan Batgirl, you'll see why she chose that appellation. She is an activist who is trying to address the entanglement of the American government in the agricultural sector from a vegan perspective. She is hoping to restore the natural mechanisms of supply and demand, which are a concern especially with the demand for cow's milk for dairy, because there's so much government enforcement in trying to regularize both the supply and the price of dairy products. And she's correct in saying this does go back to the Great Depression era. There have been further legal reforms and new implements, new instruments of government intervention invented since then, a series of stages. But in any case, the United States government is deeply entangled in agriculture, and there is a question of how to disentangle taxpayers' money from what could be a more free market system that would be more responsive to changes in consumer demand. But currently, it is very unresponsive in the United States of America. So that is one approach, is try to lobby for political change that would make boycott and consumer-centered activism more effective. That's not my perspective. I am very interested in what she's doing. I'm watching what she's doing. I wish her the best. And I have several other vegan activists I know who have common ground with her. I've directed them to her channel, to her activities, and said, hey, maybe you guys can work together. Maybe you can make something positive happen. However, when people ask me about this, and they almost always are asking because they're despairing, they're losing hope in vegan activism, the main thing I remind them of is that the boycott element of veganism is not mutually exclusive with any other form of activism. On the contrary, the boycott element is morally prerequisite for the other forms of activism. So my point is this. If several centuries ago, if you were an anti-slavery activist, you could not possibly be an anti-slavery activist while continuing to own slaves. Now, this is a more dramatic example, but it's not without historical precedent. I do not think you could be an anti-slavery activist wearing a jacket, wearing clothing made out of the skin, made out of the human skin of a slave, wearing leather of human origin, to put it this way. How could you possibly have any kind of ethical basis for activism? I mean, it's worse than hypocrisy. There's a conflict of interest there that's profound and unsettling, where anyone would say to you, anyone in their right mind would say to you, well, look, if you're going to be an anti-slavery activist, you can't be actively exploiting slaves yourself. This is ridiculous. You have to. There's a first step here. There's something prerequisite before you can get involved in this movement, what have you. Well, and there are many other examples possible, obviously, in the same sense as a matter of one thing, one resolution, one degree of self-discipline being prerequisite for the other. I do not see how it is possible in 2018 to be an ecological activist, whether the ecology you're interested in is water pollution or air pollution or climate change or saving the whales, helping an endangered species, solar power. There are so many wonderful forms of activism you can involve in. I do not see how you can advocate for those things in good conscience if you are not first a vegan in terms of your personal discipline, your shopping, the boycott, your refusal to buy meat, your refusal to buy dairy, in terms of this dietary choice and so on and so forth. So my point is, even if we do not see the economic boycott element as sufficient in itself, if you say you want to also engage in, or above and beyond this, you want to engage in other forms of activism, advocacy, organization, lobbying government, public education, outreach, etc., or creative work, you want to make a movie, whether that's a documentary movie or even a fictional movie, whatever. You want to paint paintings. You want to make. You want to use music. Whatever the platform for activism and outreach you want to engage in as a vegan, and it may not even be veganism strictly defined. It may be that you want to save the whales or do something involved in ecology. There may be some other angle you take it. Some other angle you adopt. Nevertheless, you have to recognize the boycott element as prerequisite for your own ethical standing, for your own coherence in taking on those other duties. So in closing, I was going to say, when I debated this or discussed this last night, in real time with some other vegans, some other aspiring vegan activists, it closed with a mixed sense of optimism and hopelessness. And the question was asked, not to me, but was asked to the whole room, well, what if you're in the position of being very skeptical about how effective the boycott element, the economic element of veganism is, and you have other options, you have other opportunities for activism, other ways to make the world a better place. And I said, look, I think if we're being honest with ourselves, every single person in this room, everybody in this discussion, we all know that's the reality of our lives. We know we could be doing humanitarian work in Syria. We could be doing humanitarian work on a First Nations reservation like à-bas-le-ciel. We could be reaching out to and helping the poor and downtrodden, or getting involved in a civil war or a revolution alleviating starvation by handing out sacks of rice to starving people. There's a finite but dizzying array of positive moral causes and positive opportunities to make the world a better place you could be funneling your energy into. And I said to him, I hope you're tempted by those opportunities. But I have a double meaning there. One, I hope there are opportunities in your life like that to make something positive. And two, I hope you're the kind of person who feels tempted to step up and take on those responsibilities and embrace an opportunity to make the world a better place. Said, and I think all of us will at different phases of our life have to make the decision to put vegan activism on the back burner, to make it a lower priority or no priority at all, because we have some kind of wonderful opportunity to go to Syria and do humanitarian work. Maybe there's an earthquake in Haiti and you want to go to where the earthquake is and do something positive, so on and so forth. That is very true, especially short term. There may be extraordinary opportunities you have to do good in this world. However, reciprocally, you have to acknowledge the extraordinary thing about veganism is it's something you can do right now without requiring cooperation from anyone else. You don't need an organization. You don't need a team. You don't need a foundation. You don't need anything else. It's a responsibility. It's, I think, to some extent also a moral duty. It's something very meaningful and very positive that you can do day in and day out, 3 meals a day. Once you get used to it, it's as easy as washing your hands or brushing your teeth. It becomes part of the rhythm of your daily life. And it is prerequisite as a platform before you can take on those other, perhaps higher, perhaps lower, perhaps more effective, perhaps less effective, those other forms of moral duty.